I was 2 years into a 3-year jail sentence for robbery when I was transferred to 12 Caesars Correctional Facility in New Mexico. I remember the cellmate I wound up with, this guy named Hector Ochoa. He was an average-looking Joe, part Mexican, but I don't know what, very low-key. He used to spend most of his time reading his Bible or writing in his alligator hide notebook that he kept tucked in his waistband. I've had a fair amount of cellmates in my time, but this Hector guy was seriously offbeat. He wasn't violent or anything. He wasn't dangerous in the conventional sense of the word, but he gave off this really creepy vibe. The other inmates steered well clear of him. Not even the gangbangers messed with this hombre. The first few days sharing a cell with him, I was tearing my hair out. I kept thinking there were huge bugs crawling all over my flesh, but I couldn't stop scratching. Turns out the bugs were all in my head. Hector slept on the bottom bunk. Every night after lights out, he'd lie there praying in Spanish. He'd pray in this never-ending drone. It drove me crazy. Made it next to impossible to sleep. A couple of nights in, I wake up suddenly. It's maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, and for a moment, I'm disoriented. I don't have a clue where I am. I hear this woman whispering in the bunk below me. I can't hear what she's saying, but I know it's a woman. It sounds like Hector and this woman are whispering to each other, and that's when I sit bolt upright. Instantly the voices stop, and I peer into the bottom bunk and I see Hector, fast asleep. I would have chalked this whole thing up to my imagination, but that wasn't the end of it. Not by a long shot. The next day, I met up with a friend of mine, Dave, in the prison refectory. "What the fuck is with this guy?" I asked. Dave gave me this look, so I lowered my voice and said, "You know, my new cellie, Hector?" He nodded. "What about him?" "The dude creeps me out, man." "Yeah, well, you seriously need to watch your back with that guy." Dave tapped his forehead with his finger. "He ain't right, man." "What do you mean, ain't right?" "You seen his tattoo? The one on his back?" I shook my head. "He keeps his shirt on." "Ask him to show you." "Why? You know something about it?" "I know what it represents." Hector rarely spoke to me. He was the quietest cellmate that I had ever had. Most cellmates you couldn't get to shut up, but Hector was different. He sat there on his bed. He might as well have been in solitary for all the fucks he gave. I figured I couldn't come out and just ask to see his tattoo, so I broke the ice by showing him a few of mine. I had an image of the Virgin Mary on my left bicep, a rose on my right calf, bayonets crisscrossed against my belly. "Do you have any tats?" I asked. He nodded. I waited, but when it became obvious he wasn't going to say anything else, I pressed him. "Can I see?" He frowned. "Why?" I shrugged. Just curious." He stared at me for a while, then he set his Bible aside and shrugged his shirt off and stood up. He turned around so I could see his back. As I stared at his tattoo, I felt slow fingers of what the fuck creeping up my spine. The tattoo took up the entire surface area of his back. It displayed a woman. She was tall and painfully emaciated, with bloodshot eyes that bulged horribly out of her sockets. Her flesh was corpse pale, and she wore a grin that split her face from ear to ear. That grin was the creepiest thing I'd ever seen. She looked demonic, and I could literally feel her eyes boring into mine. "Jesus," I muttered. "Sonriendo boca," Hector said as he put his shirt back on. "Oh, what?" He turned to face me. "Lady Grinning Mouth," he said. "You heard of her?" I shook my head. "You wear her image," he said, "and no one's gonna fuck with you, S.A." According to Hector, there were shamans in the rural areas of Mexico, Bruja, who could invoke spirits through something he called black tattoos. But you had to shed innocent blood before you got one of those tattoos. You had to cut the throat of the virgin, drain her blood into a copper vessel. The blood would be mixed with ink. The ink would be mixed with the semen of a black goat. Only then could the tattoo be drawn. If you survived the ensuing infection, you became a doorway. Your guardian angel lived on the other side of that door. Lady Grinning Mouth was Hector's guardian angel. Now, there were a lot of dangerous men in our jail. but one of them in particular, Diego Gomez, aka The Machine. Now, he was the guy that bothered me the most, because no one else would fuck with me on the account of Hector being my cellie, but Diego wasn't afraid of Hector. In fact, quite the opposite. He made it pretty clear that he wanted Hector's hide hanging on his cell wall. The fight between Hector and Diego went down like this. Diego was serving life for double homicide. No chance of parole. Nothing to lose but his life. And that life was a living hell. The only thing that meant shit to him was his rep. He heard about Hector soon after he was transferred to our jail. He knew the other prisoners respected Hector, were afraid of Hector. He wanted that respect. He wanted that fear. He was a monster of a man. 6'4", 220 pounds of solid muscle, and so many fucking tattoos he looked like the illustrated guide to end times. I passed him a couple of times in the exercise yard, and I can honestly say, Diego Gomez was one heathen son of a bitch you didn't want to mess with. But when I told him Diego was gunning for him, Hector didn't even glance up from his Bible. "You don't have no guardian angel," he said contemptuously. A couple of days later, Diego launched an unprovoked attack on Hector in the prison gym. Almost cracked his skull clean open with a dumbbell, but the guards broke it up in time and Hector spent the next 2 days in the infirmary, high on morphine whilst they put 21 stitches in his head. They would have stuck Diego in solitary, but Hector wouldn't snitch on him, and the guards weren't too clear on who started the fight, so in the end, Diego got off scot-free. When he came back to our cell, his head was all bandaged up. Hector had this darkness in his eyes, like he could skin a rattlesnake with his raw teeth. I didn't say anything to him. In jail, you learn quickly when a man wants to be left alone. That look in his eyes, right at that moment, I wouldn't have traded places with Diego Gomez for all the whores in Detroit. That night, Hector was lying on his bunk, chanting all this weird shit in this language I'd never heard before. I don't speak Spanish, but I know what Spanish sounds like. And this wasn't Spanish. This was some tribal-sounding shit. It creeped me out. The cell was cold. Things didn't feel right. I felt those bugs crawling all over my flesh again, and I couldn't stop scratching. And things were driving me insane. After a long while, that sensation of insects started to fade, until it got to a point that it wasn't a bother no more. I was drifting in and out of sleep after that, and it was about an hour later when all of a sudden Hector stops praying. After the continuous murmur of his voice, the silence pressing down on my ears was almost ominous. I lay there on the top bunk, staring at a spot in the ceiling, and slowly the ambient sounds of the prison began to reinsert themselves.